The House of Representatives on Thursday may be about to make my dreams come true, to in fact do something I wasn't sure I'd ever see in my lifetime, which was to pass real permitting reform to get America back in the business of building big and beautiful things. That even as the House Republicans move to vote on big reforms to the healthcare sector.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
So it is a giant week in Washington. Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel. And here to discuss all those big things is the inestimable Steve Scalise, the Majority Leader of the House and the man in the know. So we are very fortunate to have him here as the House races through its final week of the year. Mr. Majority Leader, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, it's always great to be with you, Kim, but I'm especially happy to bring Christmas a little bit early for you and millions of Americans, by the way. Look, these are the kind of things, lowering healthcare costs, cleaning up the mess of permitting. Everybody in America has dealt with problems from this. And they're glad that Congress is finally doing something about both of these items. And there's a lot more, but it's an early Christmas gift, but it's some of the things that we do on a regular basis. Some of it gets very little attention. You obviously understand this because it's so important to our economy. If you want to build anything in America, permitting right now is what kills half the projects that never get done.
Yeah. And I had despaired I would ever see this happen. So this is exciting for a geek like me. And I really want to dive all over this permitting bill. But just before we do, healthcare, there has been obviously massive pressure, mostly from the press and from Democrats, for Republicans to simply sign off on renewing these enhanced Obamacare subsidies that are expiring. But House Republicans, and I'm impressed here, have not succumbed to simply throwing more good money after bad. And you've instead now released a very different approach to expand insurance choices for employers and workers and to begin to provide alternatives to the costly collapsing mess that is Obamacare. Talk a little bit about that idea, because for a long time it was just repeal. This
Right.
seems to be a new approach. Talk about that idea and also what's in this plan.
A very different approach. And so, if you go back to the beginning, when Democrats passed what they called, by the way, the Affordable Care Act. Kim, does anybody believe that it's affordable? Healthcare has been incredibly unaffordable, 80% cost increases since Democrats passed that bill. Not a single Republican vote, because we knew, number one, it was going to increase costs. If you like what you have, you can keep it. Biggest told lie in all of politics, which says a lot, by the way. Doctors that had to get out of the practice of medicine. So what we've said is, don't go down the road the Democrats do. During COVID, they added these subsidies just for a limited period of time. By the way, it was Democrats who set them to expire. And it wasn't even benefits to taxpayers. It was a bailout to insurance companies.
Yeah.
And so Democrats want to keep shoveling money to insurance companies who are seeing record profits while the premiums still go up. And we said, look, why don't we focus on lowering premiums, not for 7% of Americans who are on these Obamacare COVID subsidies, but for 100% of Americans. And so we went to work with the three committee chairs, Energy and Commerce Committee, Brett Guthrie, the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, and Education and Workforce, Tim Walberg. And we started putting really good ideas on the table, meeting with all of our members. We have a doctor's caucus, Kim, medical doctors who are here in Congress who know these problems inside and out. In fact, the lead sponsor of our bill we're voting on Wednesday is Dr. Marinette Miller-Meeks. She's not only a doctor, she was the public health director for the state of Iowa. So she knows what these problems are. And in this bill, which is really important for families, if you're on Obamacare, we have what's called cost share reductions. That will lower costs for people in Obamacare by about 12%. You'll actually see a reduction in your premiums. And by the way, for the other 93% of Americans who are not in Obamacare, if you're in a private plan, you go through your employer. We set up now what is called choice accounts. Like that idea, you actually have choices as an employee to go other places to shop around for your health insurance. You find a better deal outside of your employer's plan, you can go buy that for your family. You don't have that option today. We do PBM transparency, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, association health plans. Small businesses always complain, man, if I only had to buy and power of a large company. So a lot of small businesses, by the way, many Americans, probably about half Americans work for small businesses, not the big Fortune 500 companies. and yet they don't get the buying power of a large company. Well, now they can pool together through associations to be able to get buying power and lower premiums. So again, lowering premiums for 100% of Americans, while Democrats are only talking about bailing out insurance companies. That only applies to less than 10% of Americans. It's a powerful bill. There's a lot more I'd love to do, but this is a great start that we're going to be voting on this week. Everybody's going to be able to see who's for lowering families' healthcare costs and who's against it.
Yeah, I love the words great start, because there's obviously other things that can be done too. But this is, I mean, I keep pointing out to people, this has been managed to be put together in a very short period of time. And there's going to be a lot more time after New Year's too. This is obviously not getting enacted through the Senate before we go to the end of the year. And so we come back and there's a new chance to sort of even look at it and improve it even more too. One thing that I noticed wasn't in there, and I just wanted to ask about only because it's been something that was a centerpiece of one of the Senate plans that got a vote last week, and the White House has talked about it, but health savings accounts. Where does that fit into everything?
Yeah, so, we want to do more on health savings accounts, on a number of other items that we just didn't have full consensus on. Mm-hmm. And the problem we have up here, Democrats have walked away. They literally only want to jam people into Obamacare. It's bizarre. They wanted, when they passed Obamacare, what they really wanted was a single payer government-run healthcare system. Everybody knew that up here in Washington. And so that's the direction they're gone. They don't want you to have options. So, health savings accounts, association health plans, these are all things that give people choices. Democrats don't want you to have choices. We had some of those cost share reductions in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It passed through the House, and Senate Democrats bragged, and they still brag today about how they removed it from the Senate version of the bill. So, Democrats have ferociously fought against families in America having choices in healthcare. Think about this. You look at TV commercials, there's beer commercials and there's insurance commercials. You've got lizards and ducks and, emus selling you car insurance, motorcycle insurance, homeowners insurance. You know what they're not selling you, Kim? Health insurance. And why? It's because the law doesn't allow it to happen. How nuts is that? Obviously, we want to go into bigger things like opening that up so that you can have more companies competing for your business. Let all of those companies, all their brands and logos really well. Let them also sell you health insurance to bring down costs. If you don't want the product, stay where you are. But if you see a better deal for you and your family, lower copays, lower deductibles, shouldn't you be able to go buy that plan? Today, you can't.
Yeah, I reject this notion that somehow healthcare is different. Americans are some of the savviest consumers and buyers in the world.
Look at gasoline. You literally can come to a four intersection cloverleaf on the interstate, and you're looking at all four intersections. And if one has 2 cents a gallon less gasoline, you're going to literally cross 3 lanes of traffic to go get the 2 cents a gallon gasoline less. You know how to shop online. You know how to shop for things everywhere. You're just not allowed by federal law to shop around for a better deal for your family in health insurance. And it's probably the most personal choice you make in purchasing. It's nuts. So we want to fix that.
Okay, permitting, and NEPA in particular. And one of my biggest frustrations, and I heard you talking about this today, you too, and it's something that just grows me the longer I watch DC, is that we as a country, we have an array of these huge laws that were passed in the 1960s and the 1970s, the height of kind of big sweeping environmental regulation, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act. They're all now like 50, 60 years old. The country is an entirely different place. They've also proven to be, many of them, abject failures and models of dysfunction.
And heavily abused, Kim.
And heavily abused.
As you know, you've seen it. Heavily abused.
And we never do anything to fix them, overhaul them. You guys are doing this, the National Environmental Protection Act, 1969, so 56 years old. This is a thing that sets out the process for how we measure and disclose the environmental impacts of large projects. And it was good intentions, designed to try to make sure we get the right balance between economic development and environmental protection. Great. Okay. But it's totally gone off the rails. Tell us what's gone wrong and what you're going to do to fix it.
Right. And you've laid out the case so well. You know, in the 60s, with all the best intentions, government set up this big NEPA plan. And then over decades, not years, but decades, it has become so abused that any radical environmental group who just wants to stop development in America. They don't use this in other countries, by the way. China's building left and right. Other countries are blowing and going. But in America, they've got an array of laws that everybody knows are there right now only to stop progress. So you want to kill an oil and gas pipeline, use NEPA, use environmental, some of these EPA rules and regulations, use the Endangered Species Act where they find a mouse nobody's heard of. And by the way, nobody would care if it just went away. You can't even find the thing. And yet they'll use that to file a lawsuit, and it delays the project for 5 years. And why does that matter? Because number one, it dramatically increases the cost. Kim, today, a project that would have normally taken 2 years takes over 10 years. What we don't even see are the projects that just never get built. People say, yeah, I'm not going to build that road, that bridge, houses. We have a housing crisis right now, and yet you can't develop so many communities in America because of abuses of NEPA, Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act that have nothing to do with safety, by the way. Just groups that know they can abuse this law to drag a project out for 8 years. They'll lose the lawsuit, but 8 years later, the developer just walked away because the cost became too prohibitive. Yeah. This cleans that up and stops the abuses. It's been a long time coming, and we have broad bipartisan support.
So just to break down a little bit about what's in here too, and we've had a little bit of progress on this in that there was a small reform that passed when Biden was in office only because Joe Manchin demanded that it be so. We had a Supreme Court decision that came out earlier this year, which did limit to some degree the scope of NEPA. Trump has issued some executive orders on this, but I kind of put this in two big buckets of reform here. NEPA procedural reforms, which kind of to go through the process and make it more clear for everyone. One thing I absolutely love about this is just, it seems simple, but it's actually clarifying that this is a purely procedural process. All it does is require the process, not an outcome, because that's become this huge problem over the years where it's been cast by environmental groups and litigators and Democrats and judges as some law that somehow requires that we take every possible step we possibly can to protect the environment. And if it can't be done, then we can't do the project. And that's not what it was ever meant to do.
Yeah. And again, you go to China, projects that aren't being built here, let's say it's going to be a steel mill. It's going to be built in Brazil where they have no environmental standards. And we emit 5 times less carbon to make something like steel than they would in Brazil. And yet the environmental groups are so crazy, they'll block the steel mill being built in America and they'll let it go in Brazil because Brazil doesn't allow you to abuse their court system. And so you emit more carbon into the oxygen, into the atmosphere. I don't see them expressing concern about the planet when that happens. But by the way, they're responsible, these environmental groups, for emitting more carbon in the planet if you follow all of this all the way through. So how about we build more stuff in America where we have the best standards in the world? I'm sick and tired of these people who just wake up every day and beat up America, bash America. Oh, America's the worst place. Go to the best place. Where's your best place? Who's number one? Go there. I challenge you, because nobody does it better than us. But the courts are so abused with these laws. And look, you ask the people that passed this law in the 60s, they would probably roll over and say, how are the courts abusing this law these days? We need to clean it up. This is just NEPA. We need to go into Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, clean up all of this mess. And finally, let America build again and lead the world. We do it so well.
Yeah, on the procedural front, I mean, it just strikes me that what this does is it really just cuts through, slashes a bunch of the red tape, like it clarifies when something is actually a major
That's
federal
what it
action.
is, Kim. It's cutting red tape. And this is an important point, by the way. All of these projects we're talking about, your roads, your bridges, your AI data center, whatever the project is that the environmental group of today is trying to block, it still has to get permitted at the local level. And they're the ones who are going to have to live with if there are consequences. The locals are the ones who have their own environmental laws and regulations. They care more than anybody because they know the impact. And they're going to block it if it's going to be a bad project. But if they greenlight it, then you see some group come along and abuse a federal law, not because it saves the environment, but because it'll kill the project and send it to China or Brazil. It's insanity.
Yeah. And the other thing too, and you've been touching on this, there's the process side, but then there's these judicial review limitations. And I just love this because you know what? This goes a lot farther than just the question of NEPA. It kind of touches on this question of activist judges. And right now, you know, when you have a NEPA case in front of a judge, they can issue an injunction, they can remand it back to the agency, they can vacate the permit if they want to. And tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it gets rid of a judge's ability to actually vacate a permit or issue an injunction. They can send it back and ask for more review, but there are also then time limits on how long they have to make these decisions. And there are time limits on when people can actually file claims to litigate against projects.
Yeah, you need to put shot clocks on the bureaucrats. I mean, you know, if they call you and say, hey, this EPA, I need an answer. Right. They're not going to say, get around to it whenever you finish the report 2 years from now. They'll say, close of business next week. And guess what? You're staying in over the weekend and through Christmas to get that report done. But then you get it to them and you don't hear from them for 8 months or 2 years. It's just, there's got to be a better way. There is a better way.
Look, one thing that people don't really appreciate, this was actually passed out of committee on a bipartisan basis. It was put together by Bruce Westerman, the chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and Jared Golden, a Democrat from Maine. Are you expecting to get many Democrats to come along on the Maine vote?
In committee, Bruce Westerman has done an incredible job. And by the way, he spent months. This isn't a bill that just popped up overnight. This is a bill that Chairman Westerman worked for months to build a coalition of Republicans and Democrats. And it's going to come to the floor, you know, and there'll be some amendments, but ultimately there are a lot of Democrats, just like Republicans, that know this process has to get fixed. I mean, it's been so heavily abused in every state. It's not a red state versus blue state issue. You can be somebody who cares about, I'm not a radical environmentalist, I'm a conservationist. You know, the Teddy Roosevelt model, we care about being good stewards of our communities, but you got to be able to develop things. You got to improve the standard of living for all Americans. And by the way, we lead the world. We do it better than anybody else. We should never be ashamed of that. And we should always want to keep advancing. And don't let China and Brazil and other countries pass us up because we can't figure out how to get red tape out of the way to make laws make sense. So Republicans and Democrats have come together to help get this done.
Just give me a little forward-reaching hope here, because, you know, the enthusiasm level is pretty impressive. But you mentioned some of these other big laws from the 60s and the 70s. Do you think tackling NEPA has whetted the appetite to maybe dive back into some of these other big, seemingly intractable questions?
I sure hope so. I mean, look, everybody knows these other laws that we've mentioned have to get fixed. Look at the Endangered Species Act. I mean, shouldn't so many laws sunset, big laws sunset? Why shouldn't something like the Endangered Species Act be revisited? Or every time they add some species that nobody's ever heard of, just so that they can go and abuse it and file lawsuits, not to protect some animal we all agree is endangered. It's been heavily abused, not mildly abused. It's been heavily abused. And again, I've seen major projects delayed because somebody says there's some mouse that nobody can even find running around the project, that you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to make housing accommodations for the mouse. Can't make this up. So now you can't build housing for Americans. And we have a housing crisis. This is insanity. It's got to get fixed.
Yeah, well, let's hope that that's what happens. Mr. Majority Leader, we thank you very much for squeezing us into an otherwise very busy week. We want to thank our listeners for taking the time to tune in. If you like the show, you can hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to write to me, you can at atkim@wsj.com.